Hello! Welcome to using end-to-end test as documentation with me, your speaker, Gleb Bahmutov. I'm a distinguished engineer at Cypress.io, and these slides are on my slides.com/Bahmutov account page. Thank you to Testing Stage for inviting me and giving me opportunity to speak about this topic. First, I want to mention really quickly that we are still in danger. The climate crisis is continuing, and after COVID is over, the climate crisis is as strong as ever. We can save the planet, save our lives, save our children's lives, but only if we act now and act decisively. Of course, you can change your life, but the most important thing to do is to join an organization that fights climate crisis. There are many organizations that do that. Find the one that works for you, that operates in your city or state. Attend a meeting, and maybe by acting together, we can actually prevent the wars to come. A few words about myself. You can find me on Twitter. You can find my personal site where I share hundreds of NPM packages. I had a pretty long career where I started with C, C++, and then I went to C#, and through CoffeeScript migrated to JavaScript. Nowadays, I work with every web framework and Node.js in JavaScript. You can find my open source contributions on GitHub. I also blog a lot. I like to remember what I've done by writing it down. So you can find more than 500 blog posts about all topics, JavaScript and development and testing at glebbahmutov.com/blog. In particular, I have more than 100 blog posts about Cypress, testing, and I also blog on Cypress blog posts. As I said, these slides are already available. You can follow me along at slides.com/Bahmutov. My recent project is to collect everything I've done about Cypress and Cypress testing and put it in one place. You can go to cypress.tips to see my latest writings, YouTube videos that I record showing testing in action at cypress.tips. In this presentation, I want to talk about something that not many people think about. How do we update application screenshots and keep them up to date? And I'll show how I do it using a project I call Cypress Book. I argue that writing tests in Markdown actually makes a lot of sense, especially if you want to have a lot of examples of your application or, in this case, Cypress in action, and then I'll discuss my current work for creating movies out of tests, a project I call Cypress Movie. Let's start. If you go to any web application nowadays, it probably is hosted on GitHub. It might be open source, might be closed source, but if you have access, you can see the README file in the repository. There's usually a name, maybe a link, but often there is a screenshot. In this case, if I go to this dosbot/mail2 project, I see that it starts with a screenshot of mail2 program. This little web application is very simple. You enter recipients, you enter the subject and a body. And this gives you at the bottom a mail2 href URL that you can paste into your website so that when users click on a link, they get a nicely formatted, correct email. So this email has to be formatted in a specific way and the URL has to be escaped. So it's not as simple as you want it to be. My question is this screenshot in this README, is it still up to date? If I look at the source of this Markdown document, I can see that there is a Markdown link. Mail2, that's the text that appears on the page, and then there is a media/demo.png. So there is an image file. Is this still accurate? If I clone this repository, or if I deploy it, will I get what it shows? Or is it something that used to work 5 years ago or last year and now it looks completely different? Should I expect this project to look exactly like the screenshot shows? Well, we can assume that screenshots are up to date. Maybe once in a while the author of this project looks at the app and says, okay, I changed how it looked, maybe I changed the fields, maybe I renamed it, maybe I changed the location, maybe I added a field. So once in a while, he or she can take a new screenshot commit it to the repository and push the commit. Then this shows updated screenshot. Maybe they do it on a release schedule. Maybe after a major release, the author is sensitive enough to the user needs, remembers, hey, I have to check if my screenshots still look the same. So after major release, when things move around, they go and update the screenshot. Which means that keeping documentation up to date requires effort. If your project is large and it's difficult to maintain, if there are a lot of features that have been added, do you have someone dedicated, whose responsibility is to keep documentation up to date? Like those screenshots, should they be correct? And if there is someone dedicated to this, how much does it cost? Because our time, and especially our focus, costs money. If I have to remember that screenshots have to be updated, it's one more thing that I have to remember, which pushes out something else, and I'll forget to do, feature work or bug fixing, so on. On the other hand, confusion, lack of documentation, lack of examples also costs you. How much does it cost in frustration, in user anger, when they're trying to do something because they looked at a screenshot or your example and it doesn't work the same way anymore because you haven't updated in a while? Here's my tip. When you're describing a screenshot in your README file, you can insert HTML comment. The README Markdown allows you to create HTML comments which will not be rendered by default by most of README viewers. So in this case, I'm describing the demo screenshot. So how would I recreate it? Well, I would open the site, I would enter me in the to field, then in the subject of my email I would say date night, and in the body I would say have plans. The output should show the encoded URL, and then I should take the screenshot. So I'm describing what the demo PNG is and how to create again. Well, here's my big takeaway from this presentation. You should replace senior engineers reading the comment with test automation. If you've never seen Cypress test, that's okay. There are lots of Cypress presentations and lots of Cypress documentation, but this is how it looks. This is the Cypress test describing how to take a mail to screenshot. First, you want to open the site visit. These commands in this case will visit the localhost 3000. When I'm running this project locally, the localhost 3000 is set in Cypress JSON file. Then I want to get that field using a selector, in this case ID2, and I want to type me. In the subject input box, I want to type date night, and in the body, I want to type have plans. Then I want to grab the output field and assert that it contains expected URL encoded text. And then I want to take the screenshot. Pretty much all the comment, all the instructions to the user are mapped one-to-one to Cypress commands. And when I run this test, it takes this screenshot. That's what I expect. Perfect. If I compare that screenshot to what I have right now checked in the repository in my README, you can see the difference. In the upper right corner, the field is now different. It's no longer HTML, there is no longer OK emoji. We never actually kept the screenshot up to date because, it requires manual update, and manual updates never work out long term. They might work out, in the short run once or twice. But if you want to have something work again and again after every release, after every commit, after every pull request, you have to automate it. We have a little bit of a problem. Right now, we take screenshot using size screenshot command. That screenshot is saved in cypress/screenshots/ the name of a spec file folder, right here. But our README should not include the test artifacts, which are transient, and that could be our screenshot. In fact, we want to place our screenshot in, let's say in this case, media folder. So we have to copy the test screenshot into the media folder. But not all the time we want to do that, or not every time. First of all, we want to copy it on CI only, because running this project locally might create a different resolution screenshot with different fonts. It might be different OS, but depends on the local environment. It's not repeatable. And also, we don't want to copy that image every time and commit and push it, because the image might change by a pixel or two. We want to replace the demo screenshot only if it really is different from the previous image. If we want to update the screenshots, we want to run those updates on controlled environments where the browser is the same, the fonts are the same, the resolution is the same. It's no longer, hey, it works on my machine, so everyone just push the screenshot. On CI, it's uniform, it's repeatable. As I said, it's repeatable because we can do it on every commit, and we can do it the same way, with the same viewport size. And we can do it on schedule as well, not just on every branch merge, but also overnight. Maybe we can do it after every major release using a tag. And it's fast. In my example, I only had a single screenshot, but imagine we have 10 screenshots showing the application in different steps and different stages during different user stories. It might actually be very fast to update end screenshots because Cypress tests run very quickly, but if we try to do it manually, it will require hours of work. And also, some of the screenshots could be updated and some still look the same and we would not have to update it. The project that I wrote is called Cypress Book. You can install it as an npm module, and this project allows you to automate updating screenshots. Here's my GitHub Actions workflow file. This file will take screenshot and update them. Here's how it works. I run my test using Cypress GitHub Action. This by default installs Cypress, configures caching, and then I pass a parameter. Before I can take screenshots, I have to start the local application using npm run dev. This starts localhost 3000. Then it runs Cypress test, takes a screenshot, but is stored in a separate folder. And then I can use copy image command from Cypress Book that will take the screenshot from Cypress/screenshot/spec.js mail to PNG and put it in a media folder. Then, if it really copied, because it actually checks, am I running on CI? Has the file changed? Only then it will actually copy. If it copied, that means the file has changed. I can use a utility to commit the change files, in this case just PNG files, and push them back to GitHub repository. One of the beauties of GitHub Actions is that all the permissions are already configured for you. I don't have to set up anything else, so it's easy to update files from GitHub Actions and push them back to GitHub. I can see that the image has been updated. I can see the M with media demo file, and when I push it, and I can even see the commit from updated screenshot. The action user really committed updated screenshot and pushed it back to the repository. Here's my updated file. Now it's up to date, and it will stay up to date forever because even if I change the application and the test passes, it generates update screenshot and is copied and committed and checked in. But one thing I like doing in my README files is actually embed version badges. In this case, it's important for me to communicate which version of Cypress I have used for this particular project. You can include multiple badges. Maybe you want to show the main application version or framework version or library version. You can do that. Usually I have a separate workflow for just updating the badges. In this case, we do the same thing. We check out the code that gives us package.json, and then I run a command dependency version update badge, and I only pass the package.json dependencies that I care about. In this case, just Cypress. This will either add the badge if it's not there yet, or update existing badge with new version. And if a new version has changed, it will again commit the README file and push it back to the repository so my badges stay up to date. On a typical project, it looks like this. I have my CI badge that communicates that this project is trustworthy. That means the CI test pass. I never trust a project without good CI and the green badge. And also, I'm showing in this example that this project is up to date at that particular moment. I'm using latest version of Cypress, and in this case, Cypress React Unit Test dependencies. You communicate to the user that this project is using either up-to-date version or it's fell behind. For more, read my blog post, How I Keep My Example Repositories Up to Date Automatically. So there is one note I want to say. There is a concept of visual testing. What Cypress does by finding the fields, by clicking the buttons, by making assertions, is functional testing. Often we need visual testing as well. The visual testing renders a component or entire application and then compares that image pixel by pixel, red, green, and blue, with previously saved good image. When we look at updating screenshots, the logic is almost the same as visual testing. I mean, we are taking a screenshot after all. We need control environment so it's repeatable, looks exactly the same, but also we needed to update only if they're different. It's kind of the opposite of visual testing. Visual testing only passes the test if the image looks exactly the same. In our case, updating screenshot only passes and does its action if the screenshot is different. We can take different parameters for comparing the screenshots. We can look at byte sizes, we can look at pixel by pixel differences. It's a little bit less strict than visual testing. If the screenshots are the same, we do nothing. If the screenshots are different, then we commit the file. GitHub now has a pretty good UI for showing change PNG files, but you have to enable it. If by default you're showing the split diff, like in this case, it only works for code files. But in this case, for example, if I'm adding a new PNG, I have to explicitly click add that file to show the added image. But if the image is different, you can actually see before and after. So GitHub automatically, if a file has changed and it's an image, it gives you a couple of options how to view it. In this case, I'm using the swipe viewer, and you can see that the querying text right there shows the differences in the generated image. This is actually one of the arguments why you want to generate the screenshots on CI in the same container with the same fonts and operating system libraries, because they will be different machine to machine. Okay, so let's look back at our project. In our README file, we have a demo PNG. That file is now automatically updated by the test. This particular mail, to screenshot is taken by command size screenshot. Well, we still have a problem. Our image, the output, the demo PNG, and the test that generates it are in two separate locations. Our image lives in README, is referred to from README, and yet our test lives in Cypress/integration spec.js file. They're kind of far away, and I like to keep related things together as close as possible. So when I update something, I can see immediately the result, or if I'm asking myself, where is this demo PNG coming from? I can see it right there. Here's where the idea of using Markdown, in this case README Markdown file, as a spec file comes from. I can take my README Markdown file and I can embed what I call a fiddle. A fiddle usually means like a code sandbox, a playground, some piece of code that's embedded somewhere else. So the fiddle is a comment, and inside there is a JavaScript code block. And notice that this code block is the test. It's exactly the same test as what we had in spec.js, but now it's actually included in the README file. We have released a Cypress Markdown preprocessor that allows you to take the README files or any Markdown files, find those fiddle blocks, and run them as tests. The tests no longer have to be in separate spec.js file. Instead, they could be right inside the Markdown file. This is how it looks when it runs, so it looks exactly like a normal test. Of course, we sometimes don't want to show that test file or that fiddle directly in GitHub Markdown. We can hide it. We can put details with style display none as HTML element, and then just have a summary. This is how it looks on GitHub. Notice that the summary is still displayed, but GitHub doesn't hide it completely. But I can hide the actual test behind the click. I think that's enough. And anyone asking themselves, how did the screenshot appear? How was it generated? Can actually click on the details and see the test. One big design decision for Cypress team was how do you keep the test as readable as possible? And I think we achieved it. Compare my original comment in the README, kind of explaining to the user how to create the screenshot, compared to the test. It's pretty much one-to-one. Great. If we can take a single screenshot and put it in the README, kind of showing how a project looks, we might as well walk the user through the application, through the user story using just Markdown and those embedded tests and the screenshots that we automatically update. We can either put it in one single README file if it's a small project, or if we generate static documentation, we can generate it from those tests, from Markdown that embed the screenshots and the tests. Here's how it looks. Here's my Cypress book to the MVC. Notice that those screenshots are all generated from tests. We can see the details. We can see how to generate to-do list. And the best thing, if we change something in our application, those screenshots will be regenerated because they are tested. And they're generated by the test themselves. Even a longer test can generate multiple screenshots showing the application at different stages of the user story. Now, we can take the same README file and static Markdown and use a static generator to create a static documentation site for a project. Notice in this case it actually hides the details because we use display none, and this is not GitHub anymore. Here we can completely control everything that we render. So in this case we take the README with test embedded, which generates screenshot, and then we convert the whole README with screenshots into the static project site. Cypress runs the test to generate the screenshots and to make sure the application works as expected. In this case, I'm using ViewPress static generator to create the static project site. If you ask me, Markdown is the king. There are no more other documentation languages or templating languages. Markdown has won. Most code editors, text editors render Markdown, show a preview, and you can embed everything I do everywhere. I even use Markdown to create a better experience with conference talks. For example, I embed a video and the test that checks the video and individual sections of my talk inside Markdown, and then I generate static conference pages. The index is important because a long presentation usually has sections. So I really want to tell user, hey, if you want to go directly to this specific part of my talk, here's the video link, here's the link to the slides. And the text is scrapable and searchable, so anyone who's interested in this topic can actually find it now easily. I can, of course, link it to this presentation from our documentation pages. It's no longer a separate, YouTube link. I strongly believe that tests should be closer to their targets. And that's why even in this conference page, I'm showing the test right here. So if I'm in doubt, if those links do not work, I can check how I tested those links. I want to continue working on this. I want to make sure that every presentation I make, every webinar, every conference talk or meetup, the video and the slides are usable. They're better included in documentation. If you have any ideas how to improve discoverability or presentation talk afterward, let me know. I'm all open to ideas. In Cypress, we have a lot of commands. So we want to show the users how to use those commands. So we actually have a lot of examples of commands in action. Here's a typical documentation page that we show to the user, in this case four-sided check command. We show more examples in our example.cypress.io site. You can see that we show the code for the test and the live area where the application or the synthetic application lives, showing the effect of the test. Now, the problem with giving users lots of examples is that you have to keep examples up to date. A problem that's pretty similar to keeping screenshots up to date. The current approach with example.cypress.io is difficult. First of all, if you want to update an example, you have to update the live HTML. For example, you have to maybe add another button. Then you have to update the test that works against that button. And finally, you have to update the copy of the test and put it back into HTML to show the changed test. If you have to touch n places in order for you to update even a single example, it becomes hard to remember and it slows down your iteration because you no longer want to iterate because it's not that fast. You have to update, in this case, 3 different places for each example update. So that's why we've been working on a better Cypress example site, where the single source of truth is the markdown. And we can generate the static site from that markdown. And we can also run the markdown as tests. And the kind of reason for updating the examples are usually the questions that our users ask. For example, in our chat, I see a question: how do I toggle a checkbox? So instead of answering the question right there in the GitHub channel, I update our markdown examples where I describe app.html in HTML block and I describe the test code in JS block. And notice these are all inside the fiddle. I can run this project locally and it shows me the test and the markdown and the live HTML. So that HTML block will be actually mounted as a mini web application completely, live. And when the test code runs as test, testing with live HTML. So Markdown becomes the static site. I can use a variety of static generators to generate the site. In this case, the ViewPress is good enough. And then I answer the user question with a link. So now the users know how to do that particular toggle checkbox. And of course, because everything is a static site, it's scrapable, which means the users can find the answer themselves. They no longer have to ask. They just have to type into the search box a couple of keywords. Even conditional testing, checkbox, all find this example. We work hard to update the scraping to make sure that we scrape all relevant information. In this case, even including the code comments. Sometimes the users don't believe that documentation actually contains all the answers. In that case, we have to teach our users to search. Here's our example documentation, docs.cypress.io. Notice that anything I type actually brings relevant results. I've done a couple presentations that describe how we scrape the site. But when user asking, how do I do a specific thing, instead of replying with the URL, I literally take a screenshot of me searching for that keyword and then showing that our search result is returning, a meaningful search hit. Believe me, the users, once they figure out, oh wait, I can search myself, do not want to ask anyone, because asking someone means a time delay, maybe you don't get an answer. Being able to search and quickly discover relevant information in documentation is a superpower. And once you get it, you start using it. Again, as I said, I made a couple presentations about searching, scraping, and making good documentation. And why do I bring so much emphasis on documentation? Documentation makes or breaks projects. There could be an excellent library, an excellent framework, or an excellent tool. If it doesn't have a good docs, it won't become popular, it won't become used widely, and the project ultimately fails. Sometimes we see tweets like this. I'm so sad my organization was evaluating automation frameworks. I was pushing for Playwright, but Cypress won, in quotes, due to perceived more available documentation and community support. You know what? I'll take it. I think Cypress in this case won for the right reason. A tool that has better documentation is a better tool. I'm sorry, there is no way around it. If you cannot successfully use a testing automation framework in this case, how do you do the testing? A lot of documentation is selling what is called drills and not the holes. Imagine you are a hardware store or a company making electric drills. Remember, the users don't come to you to buy electric drill. They come to you to buy drilling holes. So you have to always focus on the user. In Cypress, in our documentation, we don't concentrate on the tool itself. Yes, we explain how it works and we explain, but most of the times we explain front and center how to use the tool to solve a specific problem. If you have a problem with, I don't know, maybe cross-browser testing, that's one of our guides where we describe how we do or how we view the browser testing. If you need to do API testing, we describe it. Setting up on CI, we describe it. Not because we're interested in how our tool is working on CI, but because we know that our users have this problem and they need answer. And they're not interested in the tool per se because it's not their tool. They're interested in using, in our case, test framework to make sure their site is working correctly. When people talk about documentation, they often forget that yes, everyone can make a tool and then sit next to the user and make sure the user is successfully using the tool or using the website. But you're not there with the user 100% of the time. In fact, that doesn't scale. You want for every user with whom you do sit to have 1,000 users who do everything successfully on their own. And remember, you are not there with the user 100% of the time. You cannot answer enough support questions. You cannot answer enough phone calls. You cannot do even enough training to replace yourself. You are not there physically. You cannot. But your documentation is. Imagine that your documentation is something that user turns to ask you a question. If you never think about all the potential pitfalls, all the places the user can be stuck, all the places the user turns to see how does the application work, how does it look, what does it do at this particular step of my use. The documentation has to answer all those questions, and it better to be up to date, right? So I kind of described the screenshots and how to update it. If we can generate the single screenshot or multiple screenshots from the same test that lives right there in your documentation, in Markdown, in a README or your static site, what about the test videos? When Cypress runs on your CI, not only takes screenshots or screenshots on failures, it also takes a video of a whole run. So in this case, this is a finished Cypress spec, and it shows that it took a bunch of screenshots and also shows that it was a video of entire spec file test run. Can you do something with that? Because a video is pretty powerful. In English, they say picture is worth 100,000 words. That means that 30 frames per second, 10-second video is worth 300,000 words. I mean, it's a joke, but you get my point. So here's where I'm trying to implement the test to movies generation. So think of tests not as just testing and verifying the behavior of your software, but think of your tests as demos of your software. I call this project Cypress Movie. Here it is in action. This test shows how to add to-dos and also different buttons that are available for filtering to-dos afterwards. Now the video is a little bit simplistic, but it shows that a test can be a walkthrough, a demo, the current up-to-date demo of your software in action. By generating the video from the test that runs on every commit, every pull request, every merge, after every release, you are guaranteed that this feature looks exactly as you think it does and not accidentally, fall behind with time. So the Cypress movie does a couple things. First of all, it cuts the movie into individual clips. A single spec file can be quite long and contain multiple tests. You want to really focus on specific user story from that long movie clip. You also want to slow down test steps. Cypress runs as fast as possible. Every command, as soon as it finds a button, and as soon as the button is actionable and enabled, it clicks on it. Which means the test that adds several to-dos and then navigates to something else is pretty fast. You don't want those short, fast movies. You want to slow down the test steps. So Cypress movie overrides a couple of key Cypress commands like click, type, and so on to slow them down on purpose to generate a better human-friendly videos. Cypress movie also adds a couple of additional commands to add text overlays, arrows, highlights, to actually point at some things in the web application UI, so that users understand what application is doing. So right now this is still in progress. This is work that I'm kind of going back and forth. This has been a dream of mine to have Cypress tests act as demos, act as project status, and act as human-friendly walkthroughs for your application. And all ideas and contributions are welcome. It's an open source project, and I would welcome everyone to try it out, give me feedback, maybe suggest a feature, and even better, to open a pull request with new features implemented. So in conclusion of my presentation, I strongly believe that Markdown has won. Just like HTML and JavaScript have won in the browser, Markdown is the documentation format that's the simplest thing you can do. Every project has at least a README written in Markdown if it's meant to be shared. Using Markdown as a document, has an advantage. It's just text. It's easy to parse it. That means you can embed your end-to-end web application test in Markdown. We released a preprocessor for Cypress that allows you to use the Markdown document as a spec file. We find the test and we run it as a fiddle. What's more, if you have a test and you run it in Cypress, you can generate screenshots and you can generate videos of the test run. The screenshots then can be copied and updated automatically depending on your criteria. You usually want to commit the changed screenshots only if there are truly visual changes. And then you guarantee that your application's documentation is up to date with the current software. You can also take the videos and do something interesting with them. For example, you can cut and use those little video loops as up-to-date demonstrations of your software in action. Thank you very much for listening to me. Find me on Twitter, find me online, and find all the slides that I've shown in those URLs. I also link my main projects related to this topic, and the links are shown here. Thank you for listening to me, and happy testing!